Very quickly. Let's go live. Go live. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mohammed Shafiq. I am the chair of the PCS Union National Black Members Committee. Welcome to our final Black History Month event here in our union. It is in dedication, as always, to Black History Month, and I just want to pay tribute to my colleagues on the committee, but also the PCS Union staff, who I'll talk about more in a second, for all the hard work they've been putting in these past few months to make sure all the events are going ahead and are beneficial to help you in your workplace. To all of you joining us, wherever you are from, please do let me know where you're joining us from, which branch you're from, and any messages of solidarity that you can give. The theme this year for Black History Month in the UK is reclaiming narratives. It's about focusing on acknowledging and correcting the narrative of Black history and culture. And it's about celebrating Black heritage, honouring heroes, and showcasing untold success stories. And this week, more than ever, when we hear the comments from the Conservative leadership contender, Robert Jenrick, around saying that the empire and colonial past of the United Kingdom is something to be celebrated, and that people of colour from those countries with heritage should be grateful for occupation and colonialism. Makes you think why it was so important that this year the theme was reclaiming narratives. We've had 3 events before this, so very, very grateful to all colleagues who put them events together. Just a bit of logistics before we move on to our speakers. I want to say thank you so much. We want to make it as interactive as possible, so please do share your questions. We've had some questions submitted in advance. We'll get through some of them, but also more importantly, if you listen to the speakers and want to ask a question, please do message us. As we'll very shortly introduce the first 2 speakers. Excuse me, but before I do that, we're obviously on the Facebook page, PCS official page on Facebook. We're on YouTube, and we're also, I think, at some point going to be on Twitter as well. So if you're on whichever platform you're on, a very warm welcome to this session today. There are a number of PCS staff, full-time officers, who are joining us as well, and I'll just introduce them to let you know where they are. We've got Diane Ebanks and Tracy Hilton on Twitter. Caroline Brown and Anna Greer is on Facebook. Agnesia and Tracy Abrahams are on YouTube. Ramona, who you will never see, well, you can see sometimes on some of the PCS videos. She's overseeing everything, making sure everything works. So she's a superhero along with our PCS full-time staff. And Law, who is the secretary to the National Black Members Committee, is also on. She'll be monitoring the questions and comments and making sure they get to me safely as well. So that is the logistics. If obviously you have any questions or comments, please do please do come forward and let us have them via the various platforms that you could do. But if you're on Facebook Live, you can certainly let us know your acts of solidarity and support as well. Okay, so we're going to move on and, as I said, be as interactive as possible. Our very first speaker is Faheen Ahmed. She's an anti-racist racism officer for the Birmingham Trades Union Council, and she's also the Assistant Secretary of Birmingham Stop the War. She's going to speak for about 7 minutes, and then we've got another speaker, and then we'll open up the Q&A for them. Faheen, great honor to have you on. The floor is yours. Whilst I wait for Faheen to be on the screen, just remind you, this is really important, fighting back against the far right. We saw last week how successful it is when we organize and we plan thousands on the streets of London. Just remember that in the 1970s, it was British trade unions responded to the growth of the far right, the National Front, by mobilizing on the streets. And that's a lesson for us today. And I'm really, really proud under Martin Kavanagh, our president, and Fran Heathcote, our general secretary. We're one of the leading trade unions that are fighting back against racism and fascism, and a long-standing supporter of Stand Up to Racism. Faheen, I think you are ready. So a very warm welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you all basically for the invitation to speak about such an important issue right now, the importance of the anti-fascist struggle basically, and the role of the trade union movement in these increasingly trying times. So obviously you're all here because you've heard that fascism, fascistic tendencies, they're all on the rise globally, and that's been going for quite a while. And I think I wanted to start with basically something that's really dear to me. I think nowhere is the tendency for fascism more clear than with the plight of the Palestinian people in their struggle for their homeland. I once actually heard a comedian say very succinctly that for those who faced or face settler colonialism, all of them can see themselves, their struggles, their difficulties in the cause of Palestine. From the climate crisis to water rights, rights to healthcare, rights to a safe home, struggles against racism, fascism, apartheid, and colonialism, it's all there. And it's more acute than we could ever imagine. And today we're more than a year into an ongoing genocidal onslaught against the Palestinian people at the hands of the Israeli regime, funded and armed by the United States, Britain, Germany, among others. Citizens of America are now choosing between a Republican or Democratic candidate as presidents, both of whom have shown very little desire to stop arming that regime, or more broadly kind of reevaluate the basis of the project that they're going to reign over. And whilst that happens, those in the global south and their counterparts in the global north extend solidarity, and rather than be hailed as heroes, they face consequences in their personal and professional lives. Some even risk arrests for their roles in, for example, an encampment that might take place. Of course, none of that can compare to the devastation within the context of a genocide, but it's all interwoven. It's part of the same puzzle. Palestine has perhaps more clearly exposed the extent of fascism's hold in the geopolitical arena, in my opinion. Alongside that, it's also shown how movements are effectively enforcing the real violence of fascism on the streets everywhere. For Palestinians, fascists come to take their homes directly and incarcerate or massacre them for resisting that theft. In the UK, we've had our own fascist movements on the street. We saw between the 29th of July and the 5th of August, and kind of around then, some of those people taken to our own streets. And whilst it is important that we continue to try and outnumber them in our droves, don't overstate how many people turned up on their side. We can't only organise for counter demonstrations, particularly because what we also saw between kind of the 29th of July and the 5th of August was that there were locations where we didn't outnumber them. And those same people who participated in those riots, in those actions, they are now just, those actions, for example, the riots, there were also people, I think, who stopped individuals on the street to ethnicity check them, to stop them entering their cities and towns. They're now just out and about. It can't stop at a demonstration because those people are still on our streets. on your buses, on your public transport, whatever car next to you. And so long as those ideas continue to permeate our politics and kind of cloud what the reality of our socioeconomic circumstances are, these people still hold quite a lot of power to cause immense harm of their own accord. This is all to say that the threat that I think we face from those fascists, including from even the strongest political powers across the world, is severe and heightened at the moment. And I think it's really important that we have conversations like this to figure out how and what our response needs to be, and how we can make it broader and as wide as the threat that we continue to fight back against. So very briefly, obviously given time, that's the context I think where we're currently at. Aptly, I think, since it's Halloween and I've been invited to speak today, it seems that we find ourselves in a time of darkness, a time of a lot of monsters. And I think why we're here together today and why you're all listening to this from wherever you are is to figure out how we fight back against that darkness, and we bring some light back, and we try and find a way out of the darkness that we're in and at the end of the tunnel. I think, firstly, something that the trade union movement is very familiar with, solidarity remains one of our strongest and most powerful forces. Obviously, this has to move beyond simply marches through the city centre when fascists turn up. We're not getting the numbers that we used to get for a whole host of reasons. We see, for example, in comparison to Cable Street saw hundreds of thousands of people coming onto the streets. And the recent demonstrations, including the one on Saturday that Mohammed was just talking about, didn't have as many as that. But we still turned up in our droves. It was positive. The question just comes, though, about what needs to change for the anti-fascist movement to become the kind of broad, wide force that we need it to be to push back against the right as it increases in power. And I think that solidarity has to take a number of forms. It has to be in the form of bodies, being willing to put bodies on the line to defend our communities when fascists rear their heads. It has to be in the form of logistical support for any and all effective political projects that have anti-racist, anti-imperialist, and anti-fascist politics at their core. And it has to be in the form of real political education amongst the masses manifesting again. It has to be across all of our communities to counter the media stronghold over the dominant narrative at the moment, and not just the media, but also educational institutions and so forth. And that's just to start with a few general themes that I wanted to begin with. But I think it might also be helpful just to talk briefly about what you can do to localize that, because obviously those are general themes. And I think anti-fascist struggle can look different depending on the workplace that you're in. I think one of the parts of the struggle is widening who we are talking to and how we maintain, strong connections with the people who will always turn up to these things, which we love. We want to maintain that. We also need to build it. We need to make it bigger. We need to reach out to people who will never turn up usually, but will turn up now. And the way to do this will depend entirely on who you're speaking to. But we need to get better at messaging. We need to get better at building those reliable connections that last, and figuring out how you can build up community kind of like cohesion and kind of community spirit, to fight back against this. I think another point is, just as we're on the left, is probably an important idea to figure out how we build a culture of looking out for one another. The far right can turn up anywhere, and because these people are now just on our streets, most likely quite frustrated at the fact that they've not been succeeding, we need to make sure we're looking out for one another however we can. Community defense is a key example of that. I think there's been a lot of people picking up self-defense classes, for example, and there's been some activities by trade unions to facilitate that kind of self-defense, which I think is quite an important starting point. You get people involved via self-defense classes where they wouldn't necessarily be involved before, but they will now be involved through this class. I think that's quite an exciting opportunity for developing these kind of broader networks. Another part, I think, of building these networks is figuring out what communities that often face the target of the fascists, we need to try and figure out what they need from those outside of those communities. So the recent riots saw mosques and Muslim communities taking their own steps to defend themselves and their congregations from the risk of attacks. And I've seen across various aspects of my organizing that there can be kind of a lack of understanding on how, in a mosque situation, their anti-fascist struggle just doesn't have the same term. You know, it's rooted in religion, it's rooted in kind of Islam, but they clearly still have the politics. They're defending their people against the threats that they face, and that is a really important thing that we should be kind of be willing to support and be actively supporting. I think that requires a development of kind of mutual respect and understanding about how we might have differences, or there may be differences between politics and religion, but we have to be respectful of those divergences and understand how best to kind of approach that when we're building those connections. And I think I want to wrap up at this point just by saying that I think our communities the world over can and will fight back against the increasing threats of fascism, eventually, hopefully. But what it will take is a unified approach, one where we're understanding our current underlying principles, we have hopes for the future that are really clear, and we understand how various parts of the left need to work together alongside religious communities to defend us all. So yeah, the fight back continues, and yeah, I look forward to the questions as well.
Fahim, thank you so much for that presentation. I know, excuse me, you're going to stay for some of the questions as well. Really important for some of you who are asking a question around what is the far right. I think if you target minority communities, whether that's Muslims, Jews, members of the LGBT plus community, certain politicians, trade unionists, and you hold whole communities responsible for the actions of a small minority of people, and you turn a blind eye to crimes from within your own community, that is what I would argue is the definition of the far right. They disproportionately target ethnic minorities and religious groups, and they have been called out and defeated. Cable Street is an example of that, but subsequently, over 50 years, you know that where we are working extraordinarily hard to raise our voice and elevate the voice of people affected, we're on the front line. And PCS, as a trade union, is an anti-racist organization, and anti-racism, anti-fascism work is embedded within everything that we do. And I think that's really, really important for us as a movement. So, you know, if you join the PCS union, there are certain values that you sign up to, and opposing the far right and their dangerous narrative, and their racism and bigotry, whether that's to the Muslim community, the Jewish community, or other minority communities, then you are part of the problem and not the solution. Now, we're going to move on to our next speaker, but just before I do that, I just want to say thank you to some of the messages that are coming through in terms of solidarity messages. Angela Grant, who I love, she's our national DWP Group Vice President and member of the NEC. She says, solidarity to all of our Black members and those that stand with us against racism, fascism, and Islamophobia. Let's remember Black History Month is not just for October, and keep on reclaiming the narrative by educating and organizing in our workplaces and communities. Thank you, Angela. Solidarity, we've got a question coming through, but solidarity messages from Karen Carter, who's the from the Office of National Statistics, Lorna O'Kane, another friend of mine from PCS Fired Branch, and Sean Fegan, solidarity from the PCS region, PCS Register of Scottish members, or Scotland, Register of Scotland members. Apologies for getting that incorrect. We're going to move on to our next speaker, somebody who's been at the forefront of taking on the narrative of the far right, and working day in, day out. And she is an absolute machine. I don't know how she does it. She's always active, always busy, always campaigning, inspiring, and is a great role model for young women of color across this country and around the world. Naila Ashraf is from Stand Up to Racism in the Northwest, and she is joining us. She's going to make her contributions, and then we're going to open it up for questions to her. Naila, a very warm welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Mohammed, thank you very much, and thanks to all your members for being here and inviting me to speak. And it is worth saying, I might do a lot, but that's because I'm trying to keep up with Mohammed most of the time. So I'm from Stand Up to Racism. We're an anti-racist organisation. Many of you will be aware that we had a demonstration. Stand Up to Racism was one of the organisers that called the demonstrators on Saturday against Tommy Robinson and his supporters. And it was backed by all the main trade unions across the country. And I want to start by saying it was a fantastic demonstration, and it was so important that we were out on our streets, standing in solidarity and actually saying they will not pass. And it's important we did that because everyone here will be aware of what happened in August with those race riots. And it's important for us to say that, yes, they were race riots, but in some cases, what happened in August went beyond riots. If you are trying to burn down a hotel, which you believe is housing refugees, that is a pogrom. That is not a riot. That is a pogrom against refugees. And that's what was, in some cases, was happening across the country. And it was so important that people came out. And in August, I think it's worth saying, it was historic what we did in Britain. Nowhere across Europe did that happen, where the far right came out, organised and tried to attack minorities within our communities, and people came out in huge numbers. I'm sure a lot of you will have been out on your streets. You would have seen what happened, for instance, in Walthamstow, where 10,000 people came out. But actually, it was the same across the country. People understood the sense of solidarity that was needed to push the far right back. But it is important to say that the far right and the fascists haven't gone away. And that's why Saturday was so important. They believe, because of the years of austerity, because of the fact that a politician like Farage and Reform UK have got 5 MPs, the fact that Reform UK got 4 million votes in the general election, the fact that we have a situation, people are, quite honestly worried about the future, the cost of living crisis, and our politicians have no response to that. And in addition to that, it looks like there is a potential for Trump to win in America. All of this means that there is fertile ground for the far right to grow. And they believe, I honestly believe Tommy Robinson and his supporters believe that they can get bigger in this environment. They've seen what's happened across Europe. There are whole countries across Europe where the far right have been able to make some real inroads, not just on the streets, intimidating people, but in the electoral space as well. And I think Tommy Robinson in particular and the group around him believe that they can make some headway here in Britain as well. And I think they want to unite their street movement, really, of thugs on the streets, with the political wing of Reform UK. And so for us to come out in mass numbers and mobilise against them and point the finger and call them out for who they are not, people that are concerned about refugees or, cost of living crisis. These are far right activists. They are fascists, and we need to call them out for that. And every time we do that, and it's important that we do, but every time we do that, we are able then to separate them from some of the more softer elements and stop them from growing. And that's important, because if we are out on the streets and they take the space, it gives them confidence. And it's worth saying that on Saturday, with the support of the trade union movement across the board, Muslim organizations, community groups, we were able to mobilize 20,000 people in the centre of London. Now, it's worth saying that we did not outnumber their side. They had 25,000. However, we have to take heart from the fact that actually our demonstration represented the breadth and depth of the working class in Britain today. We were young, we were old, we were white, we were black, we were people of faith, we were people of no faith, and we were out there in solidarity and in strength. And the fact that we had over 100 trade union banners is a reflection of the support that we had and the strength of our movement. And that is something that really we should really celebrate. But we have to also be very clear that the job isn't done. We have to continue building, because a climate under which they can build hasn't gone away. The fact that, Farage and Reform UK, and actually to an extent, well, to a big extent, you look at some of the rhetoric coming from the Tory leadership, you can understand why the far right are getting more and more confident. So we need to continue building, because things are not going to get any better, in the sense of the cost of living is going to deepen. The sense of despair because politicians don't have an answer isn't going to go away. And in fact, the only thing politicians really want to talk about is how tough they want to be around refugees. And I think the far right see this as their moment to build. So we have to continue to broaden our movement. And it is worth saying, I'm proud to be speaking here today because one of the things that I recognize as Stand Up to Racism, the strength of our organization, I think very much comes from the support and the organization we have and the links that we have with the trade union movement. That is so important. And in Britain, we have a history of fighting back against the fascists, against the racists. And it's important we do that. It's important we do that while they are still small enough to be pushed off the streets. We do not want to be in a position like we have in places like Germany or Italy, where, you know, they're in parliament. The prime minister is known to be a hard right politician, where we have France, where they're an accepted opposition and they're in power in some cases. We can't wait for them to be that big. We need to push them off the streets now. And I absolutely believe we can do that. The other thing I just want to touch on, we have to be very aware that if Trump gets elected in America, we need to mobilize our side, because that will, if he gets elected, or even if he comes close and there's a contention, he will contest it and he will, come out with no doubt that the election was stolen. If he gets elected or even comes close to getting elected, we know that will give confidence to the far right across Europe, across the world, but particularly here in Britain. And so we need to be prepared to be out on the streets, to stand up against the racists and stand in solidarity with all those that are going to be on the streets in America pushing back against Trump supporters, really in some cases really hard right supporters of Trump. So I think I want to end with this. What we did on Saturday was fantastic. It was historic, and it was built through our work with the trade union movement, but that work hasn't ended. There's a lot more work to do. But I believe our trajectory is that we can grow much bigger and much stronger, but we need to continue building the links between organizations like Stand Up to Racism and the trade union movement, and activists within the trade unions, and each branch across the country needs to work more closely and be out in the streets and building the mass movement.
Naila, thank you so much, as always, and thank you for all the work that you do, because it's really vitally important, not just for Greater Manchester, but also across the Northwest and the country. So thank you so much. And also, I just want to say, Tony Conway, who's a former member of PCS, he's a member of ARM, Senses Solidarity from PCS ARM. So very, very grateful to you as well, and everybody else. If you've got any solidarity messages you want to send us, please do post them, and colleagues from the office will make sure they get to me as quickly as possible. Right, questions time. Okay, so let's go to some of the questions. I probably wanted to just ask you, if I could, Naila, around how do we tackle the sort of narrative which has become mainstream in our politics and in our media that normalizes the language that we've heard on Southport, but racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and how do we confront that in our branches, within the trade union movement?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because when Southport happened, there was a big, the narrative was, it's because of disinformation. Actually, even when they talk about that, we need to push back and say, even if the individual that had carried out that horrific attack in Southport, even if he was a Muslim, even if he was a refugee, it is not acceptable, and it does not justify the actions that were then carried out. And I think as trade unions, we need to hold people to account. If we hear something in the workplace, we need to hold people to account. But also, as a trade union movement, we need to put our support behind movements on the ground. So when people came out in solidarity, in support of refugees, we need to make sure our banners are there. We need to make sure our members are there, because actually the two go together. If you're fighting in the workplace and you're fighting in the streets, it makes you more powerful. If you go on a demonstration together, many people would have been out as delegations from their workplace on Saturday. And I think the confidence that they would have gained from what they did on Saturday can be taken back into the workplace and make them stronger in organising within the workplace. And actually, we know there will be some people who will have voted, reform, who are in the workplace. You can have those discussions. You're more confident as a collective to take those arguments on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Naila. Fahim, isn't there a issue around? Sorry, my questions have disappeared from my screen. Sorry. Yeah, here it is. So in your, because you're obviously organising and you do a lot of work in Birmingham, Stop the War. How can we increase the sort of coalition working relationship between trade unions, PCS in this instance, with community groups and activists and other organisations at a grassroots level to fight far right extremism?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think Stop the War has also been trying to do in Birmingham this connecting with trade unions and particularly like workers who are across the city. I think one of the things that is, patently clear is that workers hold a lot of power, a lot of sway. We had the strike waves last year, which were really powerful indication of how much can be done when workers decide to use their kind of collective bargaining rights and their rights to strike. They could shut down this country, and this country can't run without the workers on the ground, right? So clearly building those connections is really important, and we've begun doing work around developing a trade union network. We've been working with through Stop the War and various other things with the Trades Council. We're trying to kind of link up the reality that workers need to be invested in these broader struggles against fascism, because it will come really quickly. It will come before we know it, and it's here, right? We're talking right now about people who have already been elected to parliament, people who are constantly bringing more thugs onto the streets, or people onto the streets to harm others in their community. That's already happening. So we're in a dark place. But I think, it's mostly through building those connections, properly kind of reliable connections, the ones that can last, notwithstanding the difficulties that people face, and figuring out exactly what people need from us. And that's a slow process, but I think it's kind of been kicked into fifth gear now as we're trying to fight back.
Yeah, that's really true. Thank you for that. Naila, what role does the media and social media digital platforms play in spreading far-right ideologies? Because we know from the summer and the sort of race riots and the hatred that was spread by a lot of fake news from people who weren't even living in the UK or aware of it. What can we do as the trade union movement to recognise and combat that influence?
So it's true that actually you can spread a whole host of lies on social media. And we saw a lot of that in August. But it's also worth saying that these don't come from nowhere. So, for instance, it's not some automated machine on social media. It doesn't have a life of its own. It was people like Farage who, because he sits in Parliament, get away with saying a whole host of things. It was for people like Tommy Robinson. And there is already legislation that can hold these people to account, but they get away with it. Let's not forget Boris Johnson, when he was in power, the comments that he made about Muslim women and who cover their face, who wear the niqab, the veil. When he made those comments, it is worth knowing that in the week after he made those comments, attacks against Muslim women who look like me, who choose to cover my head, rose by 300%. So although there's a lot of comments and questions and concerns around social media platforms, they don't work in isolation. Those comments are shared and everything, but they're not generated out of nothing. So I think, firstly, yes, let's focus on some of that. But firstly, let's look at the people in the real world space, like the likes of Farage, like Tory politicians who say the most shocking things and get away with it in the name of campaigning, and the likes of Tommy Robinson. And yes, let's not forget the media. They give these people a platform and they make it acceptable. And that's why, when Boris Johnson said the comments he said many years ago, we had a demonstration right outside his constituency office saying that is not acceptable. I know here where I am in the Northwest, there is going to be a meeting called by Tory members, Conservative members concerned about refugees being housed in a hotel. Some of these things are unacceptable. They add to the climate of fear and concern. And in a lot of these cases, these people use these and make these comments to win, they think they can win votes. And we need to hold them to account every time they do that.
That's really fascinating because, remember He didn't just attack Muslim women. He kind of talked about black people in Africa bearing watermelon smiles. He seems to targeted a number of minority communities. I think we've got one more question for you, Farheen. How can trade unions influence government policies and legislation to ensure stronger protection against far-right activities that undermine social cohesion and equality?
That's also a great question. I think one of the things that, and I know that Naila also mentioned legislation. I think one of the things, firstly, I want us to remember is the law is not the thing that will save us. We have to mobilize from the ground up, and we have to force that change through mass mobilizations, through building community understanding of exactly what we want from our government in order to protect not only us here in the UK, but people abroad, right? We don't want more imperialist warfare that comes back home and makes our communities more unsafe. We don't want that. And I think the second thing to talk about maybe briefly is that I think we've also seen legislation being used against trade unions for a number of years. And there's a lot of mobilization going on right now, for example, around the Employment Rights Bill, where trade unions clearly have a role to play, a really key one, to improve workers' rights here and try and make it so that we don't have as many restrictions on trade union activity. In order to continue building on that, I think we need to understand who our argument is against. Obviously, currently we have a Labour Party in government that isn't necessarily in agreement with us on a lot of things when it comes to fascism and the far right. And I think we need to then say, okay, well, we're going to start from here, where a number of groups, a number of trade unions coming together, and we stand with various anti-racist and anti-fascist organizations. We're going to give them our time, our energy, our logistical support. Every effort will be gone towards them, and we will make sure that the Labour Party understands that those are our priorities. I think that's kind of what we need to start doing. And I think that's why within Birmingham, at least, we've been trying to mobilize behind anti-racist and anti-fascist organizations and various people across the city to make sure that that's our priority. Our priority is very clear. We've also been doing a lot of work around talking about migrants, refugees, people who move in ways that aren't necessarily covered by the mainstream discourse. And I think that's also really important at a time like this. And that includes, for example, lobbying as trade unions for better rights and recognitions for people who migrate. So yeah, I think there's like a multifaceted answer to that. And I'm not sure if I answered that in the best possible way, but I think that's how we could use our leverage. We could use our power as workers to understand how these things are connected and demand better from the state, because we're not getting what we want at the moment.
Farheen and Naila, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all that you do, because really important work going on in your respective regions in sort of the Northwest and the West Midlands. I'm very, very grateful for you to join us tonight here on PCS, and solidarity to you and your organisations. Farheen from Birmingham, I think. Yeah, are you a Brummie?
Yeah, I am a Brummie.
Proudly so.
I somehow managed to duck the accent, but I do love it. It's a great accent. Big fan.
Okay, swiftly moving on. Thank you, joking. Thank you so much, Farheen, and thank you so much, Naila. She's from Manchester, which is the best city in the UK, but I'm sure there'll be other speakers who may disagree with that. Thank you so much. Obviously, solidarity from HM Prison and Probation Service, National Branch. Also solidarity from HMRC Merseyside branch and the HMRC Black Members Advisory Group and our Vice Chair, Tracy Hilton, as well. Okay, so one of the people who really inspires us every day and is doing a great job in Parliament to advocate for PCS members, not just on the issues of anti-racism, fighting the far right, but actually on terms and conditions, pay, pensions, and the attacks on civil service that we've seen and PCS members over the last 14 years under the Tories, and seems to have been continued under this new Labour government, has been Kim Johnston. She's the MP for one of the constituencies in Liverpool. She's recorded a video, and we're going to show that video and then move on to our next group of speakers. As ever, if you've got any messages on that, please do send them. And also, if you have any questions or comments that you want to share with us, please do post them, and colleagues who are looking after them as the admin will get them to me as quickly as possible. So we're going to go and hear from Kim Johnston MP.
Hi everybody, my name's Kim Johnson. I'm the MP for Liverpool Riverside. I was elected in 2019 as the first Black MP for Liverpool. I also wanted to take this opportunity to send a message to PCS members before the end of Black History Month 2024, just to say what a great job that I think that PCS does in terms of supporting and challenging discrimination in the workplace and supporting Black members. But I'm really proud and privileged to be a member of the PCS Parliamentary Group, and I was formerly a member of the predecessor union when I worked at HMRC many years ago. But comrades, Black History Month shouldn't only be consigned to the month of October. It should be recognised all year round, because Black history is everyone's history, and recognising the contribution of Black people and Black workers should be celebrated all year round. As a Socialist MP, I've been very proud and privileged to stand on picket lines with members both in my constituency and nationally, fighting for better pay, terms and conditions. And I would say that PCS as a union has played a key role in supporting Black members in the workplace. But as a former rep and the deputy chair of Unison's Black Members Committee, I would urge all members to join a union and also to become active in the union and active in your branches, because an injury to one is an injury to all. So solidarity, comrades.
Thank you so much to Kim Johnston, MP for Birmingham, Liverpool, Riverside. Thank you so much. As always, lots of new MPs. There's over 300 plus new MPs. And so people who are watching this and are members of PCS, it'd be great if you could write to your MP and ask them to join the PCS Union Parliamentary Group. And because being a part of that, they'll be able to get briefings, stories about the terms and conditions and the situation for our members in their constituencies. In pretty much every constituency, we have a job centre, a DWP presence, for example, or HMRC presence, or a court service. So across the country, in all the constituencies, there is PCS members either living there or our offices are there. So we would encourage you to write to your MP and encourage them to join PCS Union Parliamentary Group. On that. So lots of solidarity messages also coming through. Just saying, sorry. I think lots of people are really, really touched by that video. But yeah, the work of fighting the far right is all our responsibilities, not just people of color and its allies. And that's why it's so important. We're a very important junction, I believe. And the role of trade unions is absolutely vital to that. And that's why last weekend was so powerful with the unions coming together and, making sure that we're not just talking a good talk, we're on the grassroots, the ground level as well. We're going to move on to our next speaker, who might not need an introduction from PCS. He's our national president. It takes a while to take away the vice. He is our national president, Martin Kavanagh. He's an absolute rock to me in my role as national chair of the Black Members Committee. Whenever we've gone to him and Fran and Mark Swatka before him and asked for anything to do with anti-racism, they didn't hesitate to support us. Your support over COVID, Martin, your support to fight back against racism and xenophobia, your support for the Palestinian cause, you truly inspires every day. I'm really honoured and privileged to call you a friend and a brother. Martin Kavanagh, the floor is yours.
Brilliant, Mohammed. Thank you so much for that and for those kind words. And good evening, everyone. I want to thank everyone who's joined this really important event tonight. As Mohammed said earlier on, the last of our 4 events that have taken place throughout October to celebrate Black History Month. And it really is a pleasure to be here tonight as the national president of PCS. I want to start off, though, by paying tribute to all of the members of the National Black Members Committee, and also to all of the brilliant PCS staff who put on not just tonight's event, but also worked tirelessly behind the scenes to put on all the first 3 events throughout October, which really have been inspirational and been incredibly well received. But I think Mohammed has just hit the nail on the head in terms of the importance of where we find ourselves right now and the importance of our response as a union as part of that wider movement that we've heard so eloquently put by our first 2 speakers, Faheen and Naila. about the real importance of our mobilisation and the intensity of which we have to respond to the challenges we currently face. I was privileged enough to represent PCS at the Stand Up to Racism fringe event at this year's TUC Congress in Brighton in September, and that event took place around about a week after 12 people had died crossing the Channel, who were simply trying to find safety in our country, fleeing persecution, looking for a better life for themselves and their families. And amongst those 12 victims were 6 children and a pregnant mother. And I said then at that Stand Up to Racism conference, and I say it again tonight, that they were not people who just simply died or drowned in that terrible night in the Channel. They were killed by politics. They were killed by a political culture which has the globally recognised right to seek asylum, embodied by the Refugee Convention, has been demonised consistently, and those rights and protections have been eroded. And I don't say that glibly. I don't say that to be controversial. I say that because it is literally the case now. We see in our mainstream politics more and more right-wing rhetoric, more and more racist rhetoric becoming the norm and becoming a language of hate. And that has to be something that not only should be fearful and frighten every single one of us, but something that we should all be absolutely standing square with each other to continue to oppose at every juncture. Because we understand, as our union has for a number of years now, that the solution to tragedies such as that happened in September, but others, many others, sadly, that have happened as well, is not about policing or making our borders more reinforced, but is actually about policy. It's about creating safe passage that allows refugees to enter the UK safely and to begin their asylum claim. And I'm really, really proud of the work that we have done as a union, where we have thousands of members who work in the Home Office and its agencies, including those who work on the borders and asylum processing. And we are proud of the work that we have done with Stand Up to Racism and others to campaign for a better politics, a politics that doesn't demonise and divide and whip up hate. And we've done that not just in words, not just in actions, but we've done it in deed. Many of you will be aware that we've been really proactive way working with Care for Calais, amongst others, in working up for a fair and just asylum policy that we published under our Safe Passage for Refugees, a humane alternative. And that followed on from our already challenging the then Tory government's disgraceful policies of the pushback policy in the Channel and also the Rwanda plan. And we, as a union, were absolutely clear and absolutely committed to not only challenging those policies to the courts, which we successfully did, and ultimately have forced the new Labour government to withdraw that Rwanda plan, having initially defeated the pushback policy. But we did so as well because we understood that the campaign wasn't just a legal battle, as has been said already tonight. It was a battle that we had to win in the narrative, and a battle that had to be something that was tackled head on. Because unless we understand that when politicians aren't offering real solutions, when they're not offering hope, when they're not offering an ability for the working class of this country in particular to be able to get a better standard of living, to get better pay, decent jobs, good quality jobs, long-term secure work, better housing, and don't offer anything other than cuts and attacks to our most vital public services, then they, in their political decisions, create the atmosphere in which the far right and those who want to spread the politics of hate and division will be further emboldened. Because unless we have those workable solutions, we will see further tragedies. We will see further people coming to their end and their death, either in the Channel or elsewhere, because we will always see the far right being emboldened, and therefore politicians embolden that right-wing rhetoric as well. And I want to be clear, as others have said here, and Mohammed, I think, eloquently answered the question about what you mean by the far right earlier on, that when we are talking about the far right, we just don't mean the so-called Tommy Robinson or the thugs that have taken to the streets throughout the summer to create fear and spread hatred and target those, especially in the Muslim community. we don't just mean them, we also mean those politicians, the mainstream politicians, such as Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. But let's be clear about this as well. It's not just Farage and the Reform Party, because it wasn't them that created the pushback policy. It wasn't them that talked about sending people back home. That was the Tory government. They were ministers of this mainstream political elite of this country that were spreading that fear and that hate and that rhetoric. And we understand that we have to therefore tackle that head on. And comrades, I just want to say tonight that just because racism, bigotry uses longer words, just because it perhaps dresses slightly better or in a posher accent, it doesn't mean that it's any less dangerous. And therefore, we have absolutely a duty as a union, but also as a wider movement, to make sure that we place education at the absolute forefront of our response to racism and the rise of the far right. Because unions know that any attempt to divide us based on race, based on religion, based on nationality, we know that that divides every single one of us. And in particular, the working class of this country will continue to be at the brunt of all of the cuts that we've seen over these years and decades. Reform and the previous Tories' policies, let's be quite clear about this, aren't just an attack on equalities. They're not just an attack on those who want to see a better world. They are an attack on everything that we as a movement and everything we as a working class traditionally in this country have held dear. So when they look at increasing and continuing with austerity, when we look at slashing and cuts to public services, slashing social security, as sadly we are seeing already with the new government as well coming to power, when they talk about having huge tax cuts for the richest and corporations, like we've seen Farage promote previously, then they are policies that attack our entire working class, not just those from minority ethnic groups. So when we saw the riots in July and August, when we saw Farage trying to incite violence and spreading misinformation on social media, we understood what that was about. It wasn't just by demonizing those who were seeking refuge in this country. It was also actually about oppressing the working class. And we have to see it as that. I'm proud to say that our union has been supporting the Stand Up to Racism protest this year, both outside the Reforms Conference in September in Birmingham, but absolutely last Saturday when thousands of people converged on London to counter the demonstration that was organised by Robinson and his thugs, because the message and the mobilisation had to be clear. Our General Secretary, Fran Heathcote, spoke on the stage at that platform and was absolutely explicit that we have to be there, part of that movement, mobilising every single time where that racism and that ideology raises its head. And it is always important, both symbolically but also morally, to show that there are more of us than there are of them. They do not speak for the majority of the working class in this country, and they do not speak for our members in our movement. And as we answered the call for Tommy Robinson, like we did last Saturday, we then have to work out where we go next, because the two previous speakers have absolutely been 100% correct, that this isn't something that is just going to go away because there's been a mobilisation in London on Saturday. This is something that we have to take into the heart of our society, into the heart of our communities. And sadly, yes, even in a workplace that is a civil service workplace, into our offices and into our workplaces, because we should be challenging racism and racist rhetoric everywhere we see it, everywhere where it raises its head. The demonstrations, of course, are absolutely critically important, but so too is what we do about it. So when we talk about moving our anti-racism and anti-fascism policy in PCS, when we talk about promoting that in the workplaces, when we talk about delivering that on behalf of our members, but also educating our members to say that those people who are planning and placing that rhetoric at the forefront of the agenda do not speak for them. They do not speak for our members. They do not speak for our class. They do not speak for those who work in hospitals, in schools, in other vital public sector. And actually, they don't speak for anyone who has an ounce of humanity about them. We understand that when we fight back, we don't just fight back with ourselves on the streets. We understand that we have to fight back to win the arguments in the workplace and in our communities. So I would say this, comrades, in closing, that we will absolutely continue as a union to be at the forefront of protecting those who need protection. We will absolutely be standing side to side with our brothers and sisters who flee persecution, because we have, as a nation, have a proud history of taking in people who flee persecution. It's something that once made Britain proud. But we have to be clear as well that we need to absolutely win the arguments against what we currently see rising up in our society and communities. And we have to push politicians to say that unless they start addressing the very real issues on the cost of living crisis, on good, permanent, long-term jobs, on actually investing in our industries, investing in good work, so that our members and our society and our class can continue to have a better and improved condition, then the far right will always need to be challenged, and we will always have to be absolutely at the forefront of that challenge. So our mobilisation, yes, is important, yes, it's symbolic, and yes, it's absolutely vital. But comrades, we are proud to represent a working class in all of its diversity. And that is a message that I want to get across tonight. That's a message I hope is coming across loud and clear tonight, because we are stronger together. The working class united will never be defeated is a well-known trade union phrase. And let's be clear, comrades, we cannot allow hate and division to spread amongst our class. We cannot allow it to spread amongst our membership or in our communities. And when we do, we all lose. So thank you very much for your attendance tonight at such an important event and such an important time for our movement. And I hope you found that the month of activity not only inspiring, but actually is absolutely something that you are committed to working with us as we continue our programme to fight racism, to fight Islamophobia, and to fight all forms of discrimination and bigotry wherever it raises its head. So thank you very much, Mohammed, for introducing tonight, comrades. And I'll leave it there. And you were wrong on one thing, though, mate. Manchester not the best city in the world. It's Liverpool. We all know that.
Mohammed, can you unmute yourself, please?
It's made me. Can you hear me, everyone? Yeah, Dr. Louise Raw should be there. Are you there, Louise?
Hello.
Oh, yes, we've got you there. So I might just reintroduce you because I think I was on mute. I think there's a bit of a conspiracy going on here because they got the Liverpool-Manchester rivalry, and I think the president has used his presidential power to mute me whilst I was talking anyway. I'm joking. Great to see you, Dr. Louise Raw. You're a historian, extraordinary campaign against anti-racism, anti-fascism, and all the time we have these protests. You're always there leading from the front. So thank you so much. I know you've been really busy this evening, so we're very grateful you've taken the time out to talk to us, PCS Union members, about the anti-fascism work and why it's so vitally important to defeat the far right. Dr. Louise, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And Martin, thank you for that. That was a real masterclass in why we as trade unionists have to fight the far right and why it is our fight. They are our enemy. They may, as you say, claim to speak for the working class, but they're directly enemies of the working class and of us as trade unionists and of us as women and those of you who are people of colour. They are anti all of us. They stand only for the establishment. They stand only for the rich. And yeah, PCS has always been a fantastic union in standing in solidarity with us anti-fascists against the far right. And Saturday was stupendous. Any of you who supported that in any way, whether on social media or actually being there, thank you so much. Might not have been like that. In June, I was in London with the anti-fascists, and there were about 200 of us and about 6,000 of them. Yeah, it was not looking great. And in July, I think 5,000 of us, 15,000 of them. Again, that was not looking great. And then we saw the riots. So the work that people like Nyla have done for Stand Up to Racism to get that fantastic turnout on Saturday, when we equaled or even outnumbered Tommy's boys. Boo-hoo. Very sad for Tommy, who, of course, is now in Belmarsh. It would take a heart of stone not to laugh about that, wouldn't it? He's very sad in there. He hasn't got a telly. It's awful. He's going through absolute hell. But I wanted to talk a little bit about why we've always been the class that has fought fascism and has to fight fascism. And going back in history, in fact, we almost stopped it. Trade unionists almost stopped fascism right at its beginning. And if we'd had our way, might have stopped it permanently. It's quite an incredible story, this, and it starts in August 1922, so over 100 years ago. The Federation of Transport Workers in this country said they would not unload a ship that was coming from Italy that had been taken over by fascists. Mussolini's boys had kicked all the trade union stewards and ship workers who were supposed to be on it off this ship, the Emanuele Carme, and were heading for Cardiff. And it was trade unionists, working class local trade unionists, who said, no, these are pirates. These people should not be allowed to unload in this country, and we're not going to help that ship to berth. We're not going to do anything with it. Mussolini, furious about this, and started making all kinds of threats, but the trade unionists held strong. And when the ship arrived, they refused to go out and help it unload. They refused to help it berth, which was really amazing. Unfortunately, the Foreign Secretary then got involved. The Foreign Secretary being Marquis Curzon. So imagine whose side he's on. Working classes, Marquis Curzon. Yeah, you can guess, right? And he says, oh, we can't have this because it could hurt British shipping interests. Well, hold on to that thought, because exactly what they're saying there, this is business, right? Fascism's good for business. Always was. It's always been a business class thing, an establishment thing. Now, Marquis Curzon should have known better, actually, because his daughter went on to marry Oswald Mosley. And to cheat on Marquis Curzon's daughter with her stepmother, who was married to Marquis Curzon. So Marquis Curzon should have done well known better, shouldn't he, about siding with fascists. But it was only because of pressure put on that the unions backed down. Now, if they hadn't, there's no overstating how crucial it could have been for Mussolini. When he managed to get that ship unloaded, he took that as his first international test. I can do this. I can command authority abroad for fascism. So then he plans the March on Rome. Everything that follows with fascism is, predated on that. And it might not have happened. Trade unionists know best. The working classes know best. And also sounding the alarm, who you might not have heard of, a woman, lots of women in anti-fascist history that we don't hear about. Ethel Holdsworth in 1923 was the first anti-fascist newspaper editor. She produces a journal called The Clear Light, which is explicitly anti-fascist, and she organises anti-fascists in 1923. Why haven't we heard of her? Because she was a mill lass. She was a northern working class woman, so we don't hear much about her. And then we have, moving through history, Sylvia Pankhurst working with working class people in the East End, and the black journalist Claude Mackay in their paper, The Workers' Dreadnought, explicitly raising the alarm from the 1920s. You can see pictures of those two on demonstrations in Hyde Park, holding up placards saying fascism is against civilization. And they keep spreading that message. And Sylvia Pankhurst writes about what a danger they are to us. She says that in Italy in the 1920s, some of the first victims of fascism are trade unionists and women. And she writes about an occasion where fascists torture women who are socialists and trade unionists by pouring castor oil down their throats, kind of echoes of the suffragettes being force-fed. And what does castor oil do? Well, it makes you vomit and it makes you incontinent. So these young women, trade unionists and socialists in Italy, are forced to stay out on the streets, collapsing by the roadside, vomiting, getting diarrhea. Awful, horrible, and deliberately cruel. So then we have Cable Street, of course, and we know that women were at Cable Street, and we know that very young women, like Jewish schoolgirls whose parents told them, do not go to that demonstration, snuck out of the house, grabbing any weapon they could find, like the family pepper pot, like I can throw pepper in the eyes of the fascists. The 43 group who fought fascists in this country after World War II, women like Julie Slogan and Doris Kay, who weren't just undercover in fascist groups, Moses groups, but were literally fighting fascists on the street. Claudia Jones in 1955, absolutely vital. The women of the ANL, like Julie Waterston. PCS steward, I really want to mention as well, Anna Owens, who was a fantastic anti-fascist and a fantastic PCS officer, sadly, who died far too young in 2015. And now we have, in Stand Up to Racism, women like Nyla, who's incredibly brave and always leading from the front. Sabi Dalu, Samira Ali, who's very young. She's in her early 20s, Samira. And you may have seen on the news, physically pushing fascists away from her grandfather's mosque. These people show us the way. And I just want to finish by mentioning a friend of mine, B.T. Orwell, who was at Cable Street and only died last year. She was 105. Now, there's some proof that fascism is good for you. And a few years ago, I had a conversation with her and I was saying, well, a lot of people think that the risk of the far right is over now, it's over and it's done. And she said, it's never over and it's never safe for people like us, meaning, ordinary people, Jewish people, working class people. She said, you can forget about fascism, but trust me, darling, fascism will never forget about you. So we have to keep fighting back. And thank you all so much for everything you do.
Dr. Louise, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that powerful historical context, which is important if you want to move on and be successful in the fight against racism and fascism. You have to know where you came from and the historical contributions of so many giants in our movement. We're going to move to questions, and I've just got, I suppose, start with you, Martin. How can PCS Union effectively mobilize our members to resist the far right ideologies, both in the workplace and in the broader community?
Yeah, cheers, Mohammed. I mean, first of all, I agree with you with that. What outstanding contribution, Louise. Thank you so much for that. I mean, in terms of the question, I mean, look, we have got and had now for quite some time what we call our ARAF strategy, which is against racism, against fascism. And the whole point of that strategy was to not only have a document that was a resource available to reps and activists to read about what PCS's national policy on racism and fascism is, but absolutely was there to be able to facilitate taking those arguments and that education into our workplaces, to upskill our activists and representatives and our members to challenge the arguments that lead to the ground in which racism and division rises. So that is a resource that we relaunched in earnest, again, following on the violence and the troubles that we saw in the summer, as you know, Mohammed. And, our Black Members, National Black Members Committee have been absolutely key, both in the production, but also in the reviewing of that document over the years. So that's the first thing that we want to do. We want to absolutely use that document as our benchmark to get across the narrative about actually the arguments that we can have and put in place practically to challenge racist rhetoric. The second thing is, of course, is the mobilization. And we have continued to mobilize, not just in terms of the anti-racism work that we've been doing, anti-fascism work that we've been doing since the summer and indeed for decades. But I've been proud, I know you have, Mohammed, and Fran, our General Secretary, being proud to stand on many a platform as well as other PCS activists throughout the last year and a bit to challenge the devastation that we see in Palestine and Gaza, to make clear that we will not be silenced on that issue, because we don't see that actually, whilst there are many political arguments and reasons why we should oppose the genocide that we witness, the biggest argument that we should always have is the one of humanity. And that is the reason that we will absolutely continue to mobilize. So we want to educate. Yes, we want to mobilize on the streets whenever we see the far right there and present, but also as well, I think that the points that have been made earlier on about spreading hope and giving our community and our working classes hope, and actually taking on the fight to the politicians, changing policy, making sure that we can create a better and more just society. So that means challenging cuts to social security. It means demanding we have a better and fair taxation system. It means that we want government policies and safe government, this government to adopt our safe passage policy, so we can allow people to flee persecution and seek refuge in our country in a safe and manner. And so we'll be doing all of those things in the weeks and months ahead, Mohammed, as we always have been. But absolutely key is the Araf strategy to all of it and our ability to educate.
Thank you, Martin. Louise, I mean, if you look at the narrative from Reform, some right-wing Conservative MPs, but supporters of Tommy Robinson and the far right, they're increasingly using the language of victimization, two-tier policing. What are your thoughts on this, and how can we counter it?
Something, of course, we see in America as well, don't we? This is directly copied out of the Trump playbook and also the Mussolini playbook. It's exactly, fascists have always done this way back, always been the aggressors and then gone, oh, boo-hoo, poor me, somebody push back, oh no, we're the victims. And of course, asserting that they always speak for the people, don't they? We are the ones who speak for the people. And yes, poor old Tommy's a victim, isn't he? And just as the January 6th people in America are all victims, the people who tried to overthrow the state. And we really have to tackle that wherever we see it on social media. Always have that argument. People are now saying, the far right are now saying, of course, that they were completely right to riot in July and August because of information they think they now have about the alleged perpetrator in Southport. And we have to just go back and remind them of what actually happened, that they went straight in with a false name that they thought sounded Arabic, they thought sounded slightly Muslim. They said this person was an illegal migrant. They said this person was born abroad. That was their justification for rioting. Oh, sorry, protesting as concerned citizens. It's complete nonsense, but they will keep changing the narrative. They will keep spinning because they hope that people forget. And like we are all forgetful, we do forget perhaps what happened a couple of months ago. And when someone comes along and says confidently, which again is fascism 101, it's populism 101, strong and confident with your lies. They come in and say, oh, what actually happened in July and August was this. So we were right. And Nigel's going, I was right. We have to come in every single time en masse on social media and wherever we see that argument and say, no, here's what actually happened, and throw it back at them. Stick with the truth. It's difficult because, you know, coming in with the facts is terribly boring, isn't it? Compared to the emotional appeal of them saying, oh, we're victims and oh, we're oppressed and we're the true heroes of this country. But we just have to keep plugging away at them with the truth. Don't let them seize the narrative. Don't let them keep trying to twist things. We have to work on the media, don't we, in every single way we can. We have to work with the few newspapers that will publish our side of the argument. We know how awful the media's been. Nigel Farage was never off the telly, was he? Before he was a member of parliament, why was he on my television screen day in, day out? But he was. So we just have to fight this in, you know, multi-pronged ways, culturally, on the streets, through social media, and everywhere we can.
No, thank you so much. Martin, I know that we were both involved in sort of talking to our employers, particularly in DWP Group, about making sure job centres could close during the riots. And what additional things can we do as a union to make sure people who are feeling vulnerable in any future situation like this can get the support and safety?
Yeah, I mean, really good question, Mohammed. I mean, you're right that one of the things that spilled out from, the violence that erupted in the summer was certain workplaces and certain institutions were attacked. It wasn't just mosques and places of worship. It was also, any part of the what was seen as the establishment, which is ironic, really, because Louise is quite right. It's quite often it's the rhetoric of the establishment that creates the conditions that the far right seize upon to embolden them with their arguments. But it was quite clear to us. We had a number of workplaces, job centres in particular, that we know were being threatened and targeted during those riots. And our members, understandably, were absolutely worried, not just for their colleagues, in terms of their Black, Brown and Muslim colleagues, but absolutely for themselves and their families and their communities as well. And we were very quick to act on that. We're very quick to act on it, and we will continue to be so. I'm confident that we know and understand how to react very, very quickly as a union, as we did during the pandemic, as we've done with Palestine, as we've done with the far right, the rise of the far right this year. But actually, what I think we absolutely should be focusing on is trying to prevent the conditions that create that level of hate and division in the first place. So we won't just concentrate on the sticking plaster to make sure that our members are safe. We actually want to create that sort of environment and that sort of culture where, we don't have to close job centres. We don't have to have our members fearful for their safety or their safety of their homes or their properties or their communities, because actually we have a society that is one that, quite frankly, is more caring, that is more understanding, and has that at the core of it and the heart of it. So we'll keep doing all of those things, Mohammed. But absolutely, you're right to highlight that when we have to respond in the way that we did this year, we haven't been slow, and we will never will be. We'll continue to protect our members, absolutely every step of the way, while still campaigning for better.
Louise, one of the questions that people are asking is, how do you balance the sort of debate between free speech and the right for politicians like Farage and others who have a democratic mandate, whether we like it or not, to represent their politics and their approach, with making sure that, that we don't normalize the language of the far right?
Sure, that's always the argument that's used, isn't it? Free speech, free speech. So firstly, to be really pedantic, it's in this country, people always say free speech. That's actually in America. We have laws about freedom of expression in this country. It's very similar. But those laws state, and always have stated, that yes, you have rights. You have a right to freedom of expression, as long as that does not conflict with anybody else's rights. It's so simple and it's so straightforward. So if what you consider to be your freedom of expression is causing distress or alarm or targeting or harassing other people, if you're committing a hate crime, there are laws against that. There have always been laws against that. And very often people don't realise that. They just think, not anybody here, obviously, but the far right just think that free speech means I can say whatever I like at any time about anybody, and nobody can do anything because it's free speech, or it's the Magna Carta or something. But that's completely untrue, and it's never been the case. And, we always find as well, don't we, with the far right, that they're extremely quick to want us to be all thrown in prison if we say anything that they don't like. I get this all the time. I was accused of causing Tommy Robinson distress and alarm. Really hope I did, because I was outside one of his court appearances with a picture of a milkshake, just a picture of a milkshake. I just like milkshakes. But apparently that wasn't freedom of expression. That was terrible, and that was really awful. Farage, of course, we have to watch. He will don the clothes of respectability, won't he? He will say, I want nothing to do with Tommy Robinson. Get thee behind me, Tommy. You're a thug. Yeah, sure. If Tommy continues to do well, if we hadn't outnumbered him Saturday, Farage might have been listening, He will always do backroom deals, will Nigel, who's extremely pragmatic. He just doesn't like Tommy because he's a snob. Let's be honest, Farage is a snob. Tommy's not particularly working class, but he's a bit working class for Nigel. But we've got to watch them. For now, they're democratic-ish. For now, they're far right, but I wouldn't call Reform fascist now. They're far right, but that's a trajectory. But we have to watch them. They're a real danger. Having 5 far right MPs is a tremendous danger. So we have to keep our eye on them. They are a threat. They're a big threat.
Thank you so much. Martin, how can PCS develop anti-racism awareness in our workplace and communities?
I mean, again, I'll probably sound like a stuck record, Mohammed, but we do have the strategy in place, the RF strategy. I think what is becoming increasingly clear is that strategy is not used enough. And therefore, I would encourage every single member on this call tonight, every single rep and activist on this call tonight, if you haven't done this yet, go onto our website, download a copy of it, read it thoroughly, look at every single point, every single aid and guide to instill in the arguments to challenge the rhetoric that we see from the far right, because it is there. And Louise is right. I think sometimes people find the easy option because they just turn on the television instead, and they think, well, whatever's coming out of the television, that can't be extreme, can it? It's just normal. It's part of the normal rhetoric. Well, actually, it is extreme, because there is nothing other than extreme when you literally see government policies that are either impoverishing people or creating the environment where, sadly, people die. So, for example, and it may seem an extreme example, but when you do things like winter fuel payments, you increase the risk to pensioners in the most extreme circumstances. We have to change that narrative. We have to go out there and explain why that is wrong, why it's morally wrong, and what the alternative is. Give the alternative. And that, what I think is good about our strategy, Mohammed, is that it develops the arguments about the alternative to racism, the alternative to Islamophobia, the alternative to the rhetoric that the far right keep trying to ram down our throats. It's not just there, we don't like it, because it literally takes you through step by step the argument. So if you haven't done this yet, please access that document and access that guide and use it. But ultimately, democracy, engagement with our members and our reps, continuing to have those arguments about why it is we have the policies that we do, all agreed through our national conference, all agreed democratically with our members and our activist support. So that's what I would say in terms of how we can continue to do it, Mohammed.
Thank you so much, Martin. I'll just remind for those PCS members, you can log on to PCS website where you can find a list of courses, and one of them is combating the far right as well. So, and you can arrange that to be held for your branches as well, and in your regions as well. I was involved in the sort of pilot of that, and it's a really good product that we would encourage branches to take up on. We've probably got about 3-4 minutes. I'm just going to give you 2 minutes each to kind of one sort of final reflections. Louise.
Yeah,
I suppose, so to put my sort of TV presenting hat on now, how do you see the fight against the far right develop of the months and years to come?
The thing about it is that it's a constant thing. People will sometimes think that the threat has gone away. It may be a little bit in abeyance, but it's a bit like, I'm not allowed to say, because it's using the language they might use, that it's like having cockroaches and you have to keep respraying. I'm not allowed to say that, so I won't say that about fascists. But if you've ever had cold sores, right, you know that once you get cold sores, they're in your system, they're in the body, so that you keep getting outbreaks. And you have to always be wary and keep your Zovirax to hand and treat each outbreak. Now, for 100 years plus, fascism has been like that, and it always will be like that. So don't ever be disheartened if you think, oh, here they come again. Yes, of course, they will always come again under, the capitalist system that we live within. We just have to always treat each outbreak, and like Martin says, respond really quickly. So we keep doing that. We've had this fantastic autumn harvest, if you will, of anti-fascism, haven't we? We've seen it across the country. We saw the stupendous response on Saturday. We keep building, and we don't stop, and we don't give up. And hopefully Tommy Robinson stays in prison or goes back to Spain, but there'll always be others. It's not just about Tommy Robinson. So we just have to keep at it, and we always will have to.
Yeah. Martin, your final comments?
Only that, Mohammed, look, this is, Louise is absolutely right. This is something that we can never, ever think that is just disappeared. At best, I think we sometimes go through periods in history where, it's perhaps pushed underground slightly, and racist rhetoric and the far right are pushed underground, but they don't go away, that they come back stronger than ever before. And they always will, unless we continue to challenge it and fight it. And the message that I would give to our members is this: every single time we have a battle with either a Labour government or a Tory government or any government for that matter, every time we campaign for better for our members, whether it's pay, whether it's job security, whether it's pensions, whether it's services that we provide, we aren't just fighting for better for our members, we are fighting better for our communities and for our society and for the services that our members provide. And the rhetoric that the far right use to oppress and scapegoat and demonize Muslims, demonize Jews, demonize anyone who they see as a threat to their way of living, absolutely has to understand that if you let that rhetoric grab hold, that's exactly the same rhetoric that the politicians use to cut services, to cut jobs, to cut our standard of living and attack our rights to freedoms as well, Mohammed. So absolutely, comrades, that we are at the forefront of this. We always have been, we always will be. I'm proud of our union and the stance that we take on this issue and many others as well. And I'm proud that we are a outward-looking union. We don't just look at terms and conditions and pay. We also look at the impact that our members' jobs and roles have on the wider society. And if we can win that argument and we can start forcing the mainstream political narrative to go more our way, then that is a job well done.
Thank you so much, Martin, and thank you so much as well to Dr. Louise Raw as well for joining us tonight. Obviously, it's the 31st of October, which kind of signifies the end of Black History Month. But as one of my colleagues said earlier on, Black History Month should be celebrated and acknowledged. I think it was Kim Johnston, the MP for Liverpool Riverside. Actually, it should be all year round. And that's why, as a union under Martin's leadership, we made sure that anti-racism, anti-fascism is at the heart of everything that we do. So for that, we're very, very grateful to our president and also to our General Secretary, Fran Heathcote, as well. Can I just say a real big thank you to my colleagues on the National Black Members Committee. Life is very, very tough. People are very, very busy. And so we work really, really hard to put these events together. A lot of work has gone in. So I want to say thank you to all the committee members. If I start naming them, I'll probably still be here in the next 10 minutes and I'll be kicked off shortly. But I want to say a big thank you to Diane Ebanks and the whole team in the Equality Department. Absolute keep us on our toes and make sure we keep these activities really passionate. Caroline Brown, Law, we've got, I'm just going through the names, we've got obviously Agnesia, and we've got Ramona behind the scenes as well, but Law, Julia, who's our secretary for the committee, absolutely works so hard for us. All of them do. All the people who work in the Equality Department are absolute heroes for us. They keep us active, they keep us on the move, and none of the activity that we do as a committee would be possible. I suppose a couple of reflections from me as we come to the end. One is around the fact that we are getting lots of feedback around terminology and the name of this committee and the work that we do, and we're going to start that process of listening to you, our members. So please watch out for a future session or event or meeting where we'll be able to hear your thoughts on that. But actually, labels are not as important as the work that we do as a committee and as a movement, as a community. That the themes around anti-racism and the sort of the lived experience, it might be different in terms of how you describe yourself, but the actual experience of racism is endemic and embedded in people's lives, and it's very much similar. So that was what brings it together. And the term Black is a political term that encompasses people of colour, and it's something that's been used successfully for many, many decades. But colleagues want to have a conversation around that, and we're more than happy to facilitate that. I want to say thank you so much to Tracy Hilton, my vice chair. She's always active and very make sure we keep us on our toes, and Greer, and also the other Tracy Abrahams as well, for all your help. Thank you so much. As always, if you want to get in touch with the committee, want to get in touch with the Equality Department, it is equality@pcs.org. I want to say a very big thank you to you. I'm going to say a big thank you to you. I'm not on mute, am I? You can hear me. I'm assuming you can all. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm just going to say, oh, and how can I forget? How can I forget Edda as well, who's been working really, really hard? Thank you so much. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. We're a team, a family of inequality in PCS, and we saw that so eloquently in the Pan Equality event we had earlier this month as well. A real commitment. Open to all members. Thank you so much to all of you. Yeah, you can hear me. Thank you so much. Yeah, sorry, Edda replaced Caroline, but we love Caroline because she was a secretary of our committee. I want to say thank you to Ramona and all the team behind the scenes for making this possible. Yeah, and I look forward to seeing you. If you ever want to invite me and Tracy to your branch to tell you about all the work that we do, please do get in touch with us through equality@pcs.org. Unless I've missed anything, I'm going to say thank you so much to all of you for joining us. Thank you so much for your support for the Black Members Committee, and I look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. Thank you. Good night.